Hello, I'm Lexi, and this is what you should know. Today I have a requested episode for you all, requested by the ever lovely Jodie. Thank you so much for bringing this grim slice of history to my attention. Kapunda is a small, sleepy town in South Australia near the Barossa Valley. This quiet town is famous for being a producer of cereal crops, mainly wheat, barley, and oats, and joked about how if you live in Kapunda and your house isn't haunted, you're the weird one. Unfortunately, this beautiful country town has been marred with a horrific crime that has brought a darker form of fame to them: a triple murder. This is what you should know about the Kapunda triple murder. Chantal Rowe was 16 years old and lived with her older brother Christopher and their parents Andrew and Rose. They had moved to Kapunda from Adelaide in the mid-2000s and rented a house on Harriet Street to get away from the noise of the city. Andrew owned a carpet cleaning business, and the family quickly settled into their new lifestyle. The family was loved by the community and were known as good people. Andrew, who was born in England, moved to Australia when he was just 2 years old, was always light-hearted and fun-loving, and his sisters described him to be a typical Australian larrikin type. He loved to socialise and spend time with friends. During the 1980s, Andrew met the love of his life, the lively Rose, and the couple married in the early 1980s. Their son Christopher was born in 1987, and their daughter Chantal came in 1994. Christopher moved out with his girlfriend in 2010, but was never too far, as he lived just around the corner from his parents' house. Chantal grew up into a beautiful, lively young woman. It was obvious she had inherited her parents' people skills. She was outgoing and sociable, and was quite popular, but also was extremely kind. She was known to get upset when other kids were bullied, and would always stand up for them. Outside of school, Chantal played netball, and her parents would watch her games every Saturday at South Gawler Football and Netball Club. Sometimes her aunt, Sue, would also stop by. It was obvious to everyone that they were a close and caring family. Chantal had many friends, and loved her boyfriend dearly, Dylan Pratt. They spent a lot of time together, and she became friends with his friends too. During October of 2010, Chantal took a waiting job at Cafe Divine in the town of Nuriutpa, which is roughly a 20-minute drive from Kapunda. While trying to figure out her commute for the new position, she stayed at a friend's house for a couple of nights. Christopher recalled that his sister Chantal couldn't wait to turn 18, and before he left for a holiday in Queensland, he promised that he would teach her how to drive as soon as he returned. Unfortunately, this was a promise he wouldn't be able to keep. Chantal's parents told her they were going to Adelaide on Saturday night, which was the 6th of November, and as is her prerogative, she invited a couple of friends over to her house. Now, this was not a party. It was more of a get-together where they hung out, had a couple of drinks and watched movies, and some of her friends stayed the night. The next morning, Andrew and Rose returned home to find that there were still guests from the night before. You would assume that they would have been upset, but you would be wrong. Andrew and Rose were happy to have Chantal's friends over, so much so that Andrew fired up the barbecue so they could all have lunch together. As the day continued, Chantal began to feel unwell. She had come down with a cold and knew there was only one way to fix it: an early night, and to take Monday off from work. This likely would have been suggested to her by her boss too, as in Australia, we adhere to our food safety by ensuring that those who are sick stay away. She sent a text message letting her new boss know that she would not be coming in. Tragically, Chantal would never make it to work again. The very next day, Monday the 8th of November, 2010, the police were called when someone discovered the horrific murder scene inside the Rowe family home. Being a small country town, Kapunda only had 2 full-time police officers at the time. This is still true for many rural towns in Australia. There had not been a murder in Kapunda since the Rainbird murders in 1861, so the thought of having to start an investigation would have been a daunting task for just 2 police officers that at worst would have been faced with car accidents or domestic disputes. The first responding officer called for an ambulance, and soon after the paramedics confirmed all 3 people showed no signs compatible with life. Because, fun fact, only a doctor can legally say someone is deceased. Realising how serious the situation was, the local police called in the South Australian Police Service to help. It was said the site of the house was a grisly one, with blood covering almost every surface. It was just like something out of a horror movie. Major crime detective John Keane was quoted as saying about the scene, "It looked like a slaughterhouse. We first viewed it from outside. There was just blood everywhere in that place. In Chantel's room, down the hallway, in the kitchen, all of the back room. It was on the floors, walls, just everywhere." As the detectives and investigators cautiously made their way through the house, they saw Andrew and Rose's disemboweled bodies, and Chantel was found in her bedroom. It was evident that the killer had tried to clean up, but gave up because there was just too much blood. They had left the scene without their shoes, only wearing socks. To me, it leaves a trivial but macabre question in mind. While only in socks, did the killer step in a pool of blood? And was that as gross feeling as stepping in a puddle of water while wearing socks? What do you think? Investigators were initially stumped, as this did not have any of the typical signs of a burglary gone wrong, and nothing had been taken from the house. All valuables were accounted for. The next theory to be shot down was a murder-suicide. The placements of the bodies would have made it impossible for any one of the three to have killed the other two. Christopher, Chantel's brother, was on holiday in Queensland with his fiancée when he saw on social media that something had happened on his street. Understandably concerned, he wrote a post asking for people to check in on his family. One of his friends reached out and told him everything was okay, but sadly they were mistaken. Soon he learned the truth, that his father, mother, and sister had all been murdered and rushed back home. Even in his state of extreme shock and grief, he agreed to be questioned by the police. Agreeing to such a thing can always go one of two ways from what I've learned through true crime. Either you tell them the truth and they think you're guilty, or they see the truth in your eyes and move on to find the perpetrator. Luckily for Christopher, police knew fairly soon that he was not involved in the crime at all. Firstly, he was 2 states away at the time of the murders. Secondly, he cooperated as much as he could and advised the police that he had no idea who would want to harm his family. In traditional small Australian community style, those who could came together with Christopher and supported him as he grieved the loss of his family. This brutal crime struck fear into the small community. It was just unheard of for a well-loved family to be slaughtered within their own home. People began locking their doors and keeping tabs on each other. The fear that the killer could still be amongst them grew. Police struggled to find leads and feared that the crime was random, which would make it much more difficult to find the killer. As there was no obvious suspect or clear motive, people began to speculate, and the rumour mill did its horrible thing. They floated the idea that because Andrew owned a motorcycle, that he was a bikie, and if he was associated with other bikies, perhaps the murders were drug-related, or even, quote-unquote, a gang war. However, this was far from the truth. Yes, he owned a motorcycle, but he was a fair-weather rider who enjoyed the scenic countryside and had no criminal affiliations. Another story that emerged from people without anything better to do was that 16-year-old Chantel was pregnant. It was theorized by bored gossip mongers that this could have been the motive for the murder. Horrifyingly enough, this rumor managed to even get picked up by some newspapers where they published it as fact. Thankfully, the police weren't distracted by this nonsense and kept their attention on the facts. Police really got into their investigation, determined to find out the truth, and began door knocking. One neighbor claimed they heard Rose screaming "help" 3 times shortly after 1 a.m., followed by the sound of something falling to the floor. And then Andrew screamed before there was total silence. The medical examiner confirmed that this is more or less when the murders occurred. The only question I have for this is, why did they not call the police? Did they believe that someone else had done so? Did they think that it was not their business? Do me a favor, my lovelies. If you hear something suspicious like that, call the cops. Better to disrupt someone watching a movie than to let a murderer flee the scene. Later, the autopsy proved that Chantal was not pregnant. However, it also revealed the true brutality they had suffered. Andrew was stabbed 29 times and had the tip of a knife lodged into his skull, and Rose was stabbed a staggering 50 times and also had part of a knife lodged into her skull. To add to the horror of what had been proven by the sheer amount of wounds was the angle of the stab injuries to Rose's back, which proved she was crawling away from her attacker. Chantal was stabbed 33 times, and horrifyingly, she was also sexually assaulted. Whether this occurred while she was alive could not be established. Semen collected at the scene helped police create a DNA profile, but they kept this quiet. Out of respect for Chantal's family, as well as the need for knowledge only the attacker would know, they kept the information about the rape at that point in the investigation to themselves. As time continued its steady march on, police made an appeal to the public for help. If anyone was acting out of the ordinary or had said anything suspicious, locals were encouraged to contact the police. And the residents of Kapunda understood the assignment. An anonymous caller notified Crime Stoppers that a friend had posted on Facebook that he had done something terrible, and he didn't know how he would be able to live with himself. This friend on Facebook lived near the Rowe family, and police were keen to learn more about him. The man was taken in for questioning and seemed confused but calm. He insisted he hardly knew the Rowe family, and denied any involvement in the triple murder. When asked about his suggestive Facebook post, he told the police he was referring to a domestic dispute. Police were able to rule him out as a suspect. And that would have been a big lesson learned for the mystery man not to vague book. No one likes it, and if your timing is off, you might become a suspect for a crime that you did not commit. Just saying. Unfortunately, as this lead went nowhere, the investigation was set back to square one, and with that, police decided to establish the timeline for the week leading up to the murders. The hope was to learn if anything noteworthy had taken place within the family's circle. Christopher had already been cleared, and police were confident he had nothing to do with the murders. Next, they explored the relationship between Chantal and Dylan. But from what they could find, the relationship was wholesome and healthy. They had a deep level of trust and respect for each other, and a large shared circle of friends. Andrew and Rose were quite fond of Dylan, and there were no obvious signs of any conflict. Dylan obviously loved Chantal, and offered to help the police in any way that he could. The police did not consider him a suspect. Next, they looked into the new job that she had started that week, but there was no issues there either. Following that line of inquiry, they found that she had spent a few nights at a friend's house because it was closer to work. She had even listed her friend's address as her own on her job application, but that was purely for practical reasons. They then looked into Andrew's work week and found nothing suspicious or out of the ordinary, which was the same for Rose. Both had been looking forward to their night out in Adelaide. The police then followed up on the get-together that Chantal had hosted. Police interviewed everyone who attended, including Dylan, who spoke openly and provided a list of names of friends who were there that night, and all of which were cooperative and provided access to their social media pages. As investigators continued to review all digital evidence relevant to the timeline, they found that Dylan had sent Chantal a text message as soon as he woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Monday morning. He was asking her if she was feeling any better, as he knew she'd been feeling unwell the night before, but never received a reply. Strangely, however, police determined that a reply was sent, but Chantal was using a prepaid phone that had run out of credit, so the reply never went through. What disturbed the investigators about this is that Chantal was no longer alive at that time, which means it was most likely sent by the killer who typed the message in an attempt to prevent the crime from being found out too soon. While processing the crime scene, police found Chantal's laptop that showed there had been a failed login attempt in the early hours of November 8th, and there was blood on the keyboard, but unfortunately, there wasn't enough to obtain DNA. Forensic investigators' frustration continued as they also found a fingerprint on the back of Chantal's bedroom door. But it didn't show up on any system, and with no suspects, it was of no use at that time. 5 days after the murders, police were informed that the medical examiner was able to get a DNA profile from the semen on Chantel's body. It didn't belong to Dylan, and it didn't match anybody in the police database. But now they had the DNA of their killer. This led detectives to visit all of Chantel's male friends and ask them to provide DNA samples, which they all did. While going through the friend circle, they came across someone strange. Now, we have all had this creep in our lives at least once before. He complains endlessly about being single, does nothing to improve themselves, and makes inappropriate remarks and advances on women that have shown no interest. These are also the people that we tend to cut out the second we realize it. When asked for this friend's fingerprints, he started rambling and provided an alibi for himself and complained that he did not have a girlfriend. He also said that he was not invited to the get-together at Chantel's house on Saturday night, before the murders. As the police hadn't asked for any of this information, they figured that this was an over-explanation and wondered if he was trying to hide something. When they took the fingerprints, police noticed multiple deep cuts on his hands and arms. This was a second red flag for police, as it stands to reason that with such a violent attack, it would have been impossible for the killer to escape without injuring himself. Police asked him about it, and he claimed he had fallen off his bike. He seemed completely calm and cooperative. Understandably, at that point, police had no reason to not believe him. This was short-lived, however, when the results from the DNA testing came back and proved that he was not telling the truth. The young man they had been talking to was 18-year-old Jason Downey, and his DNA sample matched the semen found at the scene of the crime. Police were determined to arrest him, but wanted to bring him in safely, so they contacted the manager at the auto shop where Jason worked and asked if they could bring him in to sign a statement. Once he arrived, police pounced and placed him under arrest. He strongly denied any involvement in the murders and claimed that he barely knew Chantel. However, after he had a conversation with his mother, he admitted he knew Chantel very well and claimed that he had been to her house as many as 40 to 50 times. The story he spun included him walking her home from school every day. He claimed that he had consensual sex with Chantel the night before the murder, but as you can imagine, the evidence proved otherwise. Jason ended up cracking like an egg and told the police where he had disposed of the clothes that he wore during the murders, and where he had dumped the murder weapons, but it was no longer there. Jason claimed someone must have taken it, but police concluded that he had lied about the location. To this day, the weapons have never been found. When news of Jason's arrest broke, the community was shocked. The description of the violent murders left everyone believing it to be a large beast of a man, or multiple people, not some scrawny, nondescript 18-year-old. Looking into Jason's history, there was no violence or no substance abuse problems, and while he had a toxic, volatile relationship with his mother, he was very fond of her and was very close to his family. But how did Jason know Chantel? He came to Australia when he was 14 and became friends with her boyfriend, Dylan. The awkward skinny boy put forward a false bravado of confidence, amazing athletic skill, and great with the opposite gender, all of which were painfully false. The small boy was vocal on social media, and it was painfully cringy, calling Kapunda crapunda, boasting about being athletic and popular with the girls, posting over-the-top statements like, "I love my sport. I'm very active on and off the basketball court, if you know what I mean." His Facebook even showed that he was in a relationship. However, it was no secret that he did not have a girlfriend. Instead, he was drooling over Chantel, who was dating his friend Dylan. Unfortunately, Jason became fixated on Chantel. Unaware of the deadly obsession, Chantel was nice to him. Not because she actually liked him, but because he was friends with her boyfriend. And in a rural town like Kapunda, it usually does well for survival to play nice. But as they say, better to be a rude bitch than a dead bitch. But that could be just how I feel due to living in a capital city. Unfortunately for Chantel, she continued to be polite to Jason, even when she became aware of the fact that he was interested in her. Chantel never led him on, or was anything more than polite. Unfortunately, in that twisted brain of his, he read deeply into every smile. Dylan wasn't bothered by Jason's crush, and was more quietly amused, knowing that Chantel would never cheat on him. If anything, Dylan felt sorry for him, knowing he didn't have many friends, and even took Jason under his wing. Even though he could be a bit annoying at times, he tolerated him. Neither Chantel nor Dylan could have fathomed what was to come. Police went through her phone and social media, finding evidence that Jason was pestering her on Facebook. With further investigation, proved that his stalking did not stay online. He often drove past her home, made sure he was always close by, and harassed her when she walked home from school. However, Chantel tolerated Jason's actions for Dylan's sake, not wanting to get between friends. She did not communicate this with her boyfriend, and he had no clue. Unfortunately, this sick obsession turned into bitter resentment and violent rage with time, as his affections were not returned. Jason knew that Chantel was going to be home on the night of the murders, and that she wasn't expected at work on Monday because Dylan had mentioned to his friend that his beloved was sick. He took this opportunity to break into her home and go see Chantel, or so he says. Never has Jason admitted to planning the murder and has not commented on how the massacre came to be. Now, this absolute monster continued to go to work like nothing happened, telling the same lies about the injuries to his arms that he told the police. Strangely though, he changed the lie when his friends asked, telling them he had injured himself at work. When the news of the massacre broke, he was at work and feigned shock, taking the rest of the day off, saying that Chantel was a close friend and that he was too distraught to work. Now, the reputation that Jason has that I already mentioned only gets worse, and the police found that out as they continued to look into him. Pretty much no one liked him. Those that he claimed were friends, along with his basketball teammates, accepted him. But that was the side effect of living in a rural town, and are what I would consider fishbowl friendships. His co-workers only just tolerated him because he was so awkward. When asked, Dylan stated that Jason had only been to Chantel's house once, and that was with him, and even then he didn't enter the home. So what he had told them turned out to be another blatant lie. What was even more twisted was that after the murders, he went to Dylan's house with more of his friends to offer his condolences. Jason wasn't his usual self-centered and loud self, but then again, everyone was in shock, so him being quiet for once did not stand out. After police took Jason into custody, charged with the triple murder, he was in remand for a year before the case finally made it to trial. He strongly maintained his innocence during this time, forcing the police to build a strong case against him. They worked tirelessly to make their case rock solid, not wanting to leave any room for doubt. They knew the physical evidence they had ultimately would be the strongest. Firstly, the clothing found at the location identified by Jason was stained with the blood of all three of his victims. The shoes matched the prints left in the bathtub at the Rowe home. While searching the family home, they also found a digital camera on the kitchen bench. Going through the last photos, all of which were taken the day of the murders at the lunch the parents cooked. In these photos, Chantel was wearing a lanyard around her neck with a USB attached to it. The USB was found in Jason's bedroom at his mother's house, and the lanyard was in his car. The forensic search of his car also led investigators to find traces of blood from Andrew and Rose on the dashboard. During the trial, Jason's lawyer claimed his young client had no recollection of the murders or how he even ended up in the house. Because, that's totally a brand new defense that no one's ever heard of before. By the end of it all, Jason and Downey pled guilty to all three murders a year after the process against him had started. This shocked everyone. This plea meant that there would be no trial. However, doing their due diligence, they found out that Jason's plea was a legal strategy. One thing I believe most people know, aside from this dingbat, is that in the remand center or in prison, your phone calls are recorded. What was captured was Jason telling his brother over the phone the following: "Fuck, if I plead guilty and I am found guilty, which my lawyer reckons will happen, I would never be released." To further drive the final nails into Jason's coffin, the prosecution presented their case based on the crime scene and other supported evidence. The story they told was ghoulish and chilling, starting with Jason having a heated argument with his mother, where she made him leave. Wanting to feel comfort to quell his rage, he drove to the Rowe family home, a place he'd become very familiar with. But this time, rather than lamenting what would never be, he went inside. He waited in the bathroom, standing in the bathtub behind the shower curtain for a while, waiting for everyone to be asleep. Chantel was his first victim. The theory on what happened starts with Jason either threatening or attacking her. Chantel's parents likely heard the ruckus and rushed over to help. However, even though Andrew Rowe was a large and strong man, he didn't really stand a chance against the swift and frenzied attack. By the time Jason was finished with Chantel's parents, he had inflicted 79 stab wounds on them. Andrew and Rose were no longer able to protect their daughter, and Jason returned to Chantel's room. She was hiding under her bed, bleeding. She would have been terrified, as the prosecution speculated that she would have heard her parents fighting for their lives. Now, I will give a trigger warning here. If you want to skip ahead, go for it. It is unknown if Chantel was alive or conscious at this time, but upon returning to the room, Jason dragged her out from under her bed, raped her, stabbed her again, and then stripped her clothing and redressed her into clean clothes. Forensic examiners concluded that due to the state of the scene, that Jason attempted to clean the blood, and while mopping, this unhinged creature stabbed both Andrew and Rose again, even though they were already dead. As stated earlier, a neighbor heard a scream for help at 1 a.m. Jason sent a reply to Dylan from Chantel's phone at 5:30 a.m., and the blood on the laptop shows that he tried to log on. He spent the quiet, early morning hours inside the gory scene of his own making in the Rowe family home, pacing around Chantel's room, attempting to clean the blood in the kitchen before giving up and leaving, wearing only his socks. A couple of hours later, he clocked in for work like nothing had happened. Jason was sentenced to 42 years with a 35-year non-parole period. Christopher, Chantel's brother and son of Andrew and Rose, openly expressed his grief, saying, "Nothing changes. It doesn't matter if he gets 100 years. My family isn't coming back." And then, addressing Jason Downey directly, he said, "You destroyed my life, and everybody's life around me who cared for and loved my family. Whatever you get will never be enough." Possibly the most honest reaction I have read thus far of a surviving family member reacting to the loss of their family. Understandably, nothing will ever be able to replace what he lost, and honestly, while I'm heard he has heard the words so often that they mean nothing to him anymore, but truly, my heart does go out for him. But if you want a small amount of amusement for this all, after Jason finishes his non-parole period, he will be exiled back to Scotland. However, they do not want him back at all, and refer to him in a newspaper as a repulsive freak. To which I say they're not wrong, as neither country wants this repulsive freak. Perhaps we should drop him in the middle of the ocean, or ship him off somewhere where he faces the risk of the same as he did happening to him. If you are on YouTube, drop in the comments where you believe Jason Downey should be sent to. If you are anywhere else, you can send it to my email of whiskerpod@gmail.com or message me on Facebook or Instagram at What You Should Know Australia. The best answer wins a prize of some free merch. And yes, I am being serious. On Instagram and Facebook, I will be posting relevant images. But that is all I have for you for now. Until next time, my lovelies, stay safe and stay hydrated. Bye!